All right, we are now recording. So I am going to start us off with just a quick little reading. I invite you to light a chalice if you have one. Always one of my favorite things to do. I have a book by a minister, Tom Owen Toll. I think he's now retired. It's called Wake Up, Daily Lessons for a More Liberated and Loving Life. And this is a short meditation called Money is Liquid Power. There's the story of the robber who ambles up to comedian Jack Benny, sticks a gun in his ribs, and says, "Your money or your life?" Benny pauses a while and replies, I'm thinking. Few of us are that tight with our cash. However, there still lurks in the crevices of many a mind the erroneous and destructive assertion that money and life are opposites. You keep one, you lose the other. That simply isn't the case. Money and life are profoundly linked. Money is liquid power, granting muscle to our visions, energy to our values, and reality to our commitments. In short, money can bring life. As someone asked, what does amen mean? The answer, I'm for it, and I'll stand my share of the expenses. Ironically, Jesus talked about money in 16 out of 38 parables, and one of every 10 verses in the Christian Gospels is related to money and possessions. So obviously the Nazarene thought it important and had little difficulty speaking about it. You and I live beholden to many visions, many beautiful visions that need our full-fledged support. We owe them our time, talent, and treasure. We owe them our money. We owe them our life. Your money or your life? Both, my friend. Both is the answer. So just want to refresh you if you are joining us for the first time. I am Patricia, or Pat Infanti, and I am part of the Central East Regional staff. And I am presenting here with my partner, who, Barry, would you like to take a moment to introduce and say hello?
Sure. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you all, most of you back again, and a few new people. So I'm Barry Finkelstein. I'm one of the UU Congregational Stewardship Consultants with Stewardship for Us. We work with congregations to do all sorts of things related to money.
Okay. So this is the second session. We are going to just talk about money today. And the first session, we talked about vision and planning and organizing, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about some best practices in the third session. This session is a little less about nuts and bolts and a little bit more about the culture change that needs to happen in our congregations. So it's all part of the work that needs to be done in congregations. Although I know that for some folks, some of my finance committee folks, the stuff that's a little bit more in the head is sometimes a little harder to figure out how to fit it into your strategy. But I encourage you to take some time to think about some of this good cultural change stuff. I'm going to turn it over to Barry for a few minutes.
Okay. So what Pat and I thought we might do at the beginning is see if you have any urgent questions, perhaps some questions that came to you after last week's session. You've had a week to kind of think about it and work on it, and perhaps use it a little bit, I hope, in your planning for your upcoming drives, or any other questions that either we could answer on the spot or we could be prepared to answer next week. So what I would suggest, to in the interest of time and efficient use of the technology, is use the chat button that Pat described for you how to reach before, and just enter your questions, and I will monitor them and read them and try to respond to the ones that I can. So maybe take about, 30 seconds if you can think of something that you'd like to ask, or a minute. And if you think of some questions later, just put them in the chat, and we'll either have time at a break, or we'll have time at the end, or we'll have time next week But we'll definitely, one of our goals is to try to get all of your questions answered. So take a half a minute or a minute, and I will look at the chat and see what pops up.
While y'all are thinking, George, I had to mute you there, you folks in York, because there was a lot of background noise. So if you want to speak, we can certainly unmute you.
Yeah, anytime you want to communicate with us, the chat is probably the best, rather than turning on your mic and just talking over, because that just doesn't work that well in the technology world.
Questions, comments, observations from last week? I'm not going to let Barry off the hook this easily, are you?
Yeah, this is, I'll go get a glass of wine and come back later. All right, well, perhaps we should move on. Oh, there's a question.
Very good.
So the question, I'll read it rather than have everybody bother to look at the chat. This says, we have never accepted credit cards. Are there best practices for using credit cards? What about using a credit card square, contribution button on the website? What are safety policies? So these are great questions. I'm going to talk quite a bit about technology and electronic giving next week, and I'll talk more about this. But the short answer is that you want to be set up to accept credit cards. I am a big believer in that. There have been a lot of recent articles about how much more generous people are if you make it really easy for them to give, and particularly young people. And if you make it easy for them to give via credit card, they like that a lot because they get points and miles. And even having to pay the fees, in my experience, congregations will do well to accept credit cards. Most congregations use some kind of a provider to help with that, whether it's Vanco or Square or PayPal. And like I said, I'll talk more about that next week. And you definitely want to have some safety policies, both internally, who gets to handle credit card numbers and firewalls and things about hacking and so on. But I think the bottom line is you definitely want to be looking at accepting credit cards in as many ways as possible. So the next question is, why in the world are we still trying to raise funds the same ways we have for the past 150 years? And that's a great question too. And while it's true that we are making some changes in the way we raise funds, particularly using technology more and reaching people in different ways, mostly using technology, the bottom line is, in my experience working with congregations, and I'll let Pat chime in if she has anything more or different to say, the best ways to ask people to contribute or to do anything are personal asks. Mm-hmm. And so the techniques that we used 150 years ago to talk to people one-on-one or in small groups and explain a business case and a mission-driven need and for giving, that remains the best way to ask people to do anything, whether to volunteer or to give money. And I continue to do research, the rest of us consultants continue to do research. There's nothing more magical than doing that, particularly in church environments where we're talking about a small population coming together. If you're looking at mass marketing, if you're looking, if you're the ACLU and you're signing up 1 million new members, that's a different animal entirely. But for our congregations, I think it's a 150-year-old practice. What is the recommended timing of the pledge drive in relation to the budget development finalization? That's a really good question too. The way I like to do it is I like to have kind of a very high-level budget going into the campaign, into the budget drive, and that can be based largely on last year's requirements, so last year's actuals, plus a little bit of new things if you know what they are. And it's, like I said last week, it's nice if you can say, if we raise more money, here are the 2 or 3 things we would do. Mm-hmm. Then you run your campaign and you see how much you actually have. and then you scale your budget, your actual more detailed budget, to what you can actually expect to raise. So I like doing it that way. I know some congregations try to do the really detailed budget before the campaign. I think it's better to do it in the order that I just described.
Mhm.
Cool. Good questions. Thank you.
Good questions.
Yeah. Wow. Ask and ye shall receive, right?
Okay. Well, are we ready to move on then to our topic for tonight? I'm going to share the screen again.
I would say we are, yes.
All right. So why do we want to talk about money? Why is it important to talk about money at the congregation or the fellowship in our church? It's important to talk about money because money is important in people's lives. Money is, obviously, we live in a society where money is very much at the heart of everything we do. If we are working, money is important. If we are eating, money is important. If we want to have a roof over our head, money is important. Every piece of our lives in some way or another is connected to money. Making it, spending it, having enough, not having enough. Sometimes in congregations, we make the mistake of not talking about money at all. Give me a raise of hands. Is it easy to talk about money in your congregation? Or is it one of those things that, no, we're not going to go there? All right, we got a couple people who say, yeah, we can talk about money. Okay, that's good. So in some congregations, money is just something that we really don't talk about. In some congregations, we talk about money, but we talk about it perhaps from with an attitude of scarcity about it. So we might be talking about it in ways that are communicating to people that perhaps the leaders are anxious about money, or we're in a situation where there isn't enough, or we're talking about it so frequently that people sort of begin to just the shutters go down, and people are not listening as carefully and as effectively as they can to what we're trying to say about money. So one of the most important things when we think about talking about money in the congregation is to find some balance in that. So how can we let people know that money is something that is healthy to talk about because it is an important part of our life? It's something that's important to talk about because it's very much the way we spend money is very much connected to the things that we value and our Unitarian Universalist values as well. But we are not obsessed with money in a way that is unhealthy. So you have to find that balance in the congregation. I just want to start with just kind of a few different definitions. Sometimes when we talk about one thing and we use a term for it, we may not realize that, well, other people may actually have a slightly different definition. So these are just my definitions. They're not exhaustive and they're not definitive, but it's just a way of differentiating among a few concepts. So money. Money is what we use to pay for goods and services. It's how people get paid for work. It's how we measure a person's wealth. And it's usually a stand-in for things that have value or are valuable to us. It's an expression of power. If you follow the political conversation at all, you know that there are people who are, that money is a kind of currency in how policies get made and how laws get passed and even how people get elected into office. So it has lots of different uses, but it is a tool. It's ultimately a tool that's representative of other things: power, value, and energy. Fundraising, we do lots of that in our congregations. You know, you want to use the term fundraising versus the term pledge versus the term canvas. That's different people use it different way. I know I've had congregations say, well, we do our annual budget drive, but then we want to do fundraising on the side. It's all fundraising. It's all fundraising. What we are doing is we are asking people to contribute their money, their energy, to help us do the work that we need to do to help us fulfill the mission in our congregation. We get it from individuals, we may get it from grants, we may get it from other places, but ultimately it's just the process of getting voluntary contributions of money or time or other kinds of talents. Stewardship is, in my definition, stewardship is a broader concept. Stewardship is really, it's sort of the care of everything. It's the care of the people that we love. It's the care of the planet that we love. It's how we make the values that we cherish come alive in our own lives and in the world. So it's a broader concept. So we do have stewardship teams, and oftentimes the stewardship team is managing our annual pledge drive or our annual campaign. But the annual campaign is really just a part of this bigger idea of stewardship. So stewardship might be in the way that we care for do pastoral care in our congregation. It might be in how, whether or not folks are willing to volunteer to teach religious education. That's a form of stewardship. It's how we care for the community around us, the neighborhood that we are a part of. So it's a broader concept than just sort of an annual campaign. Generosity. Generosity is a value. Generosity is a practice. It is the act of being kind and generous with, again, our time, talent, and treasure certainly in our congregational settings. Generosity is something that can be learned and can be cultivated. And generosity, of course, ultimately we love if people are generous with their checkbooks, but we also want people to be generous in their time and the ways that they volunteer in the congregation. We want them to be generous of spirit, the way that they are in relationship with others, the way that they invest themselves in our community. So it's just this kind of broader, expansive way of being in relationship with one another. So I just wanted to take a minute and just, ask you to reflect. Do you recognize in your congregation so if people are generous or there are acts of generosity that you witness or that you invite people to share, how do you recognize those, or how do they get shared with the broader congregation? And if somebody wants to just either write in the chat box, or we can take two or three folks if they want to unmute and just share a quick reflection. How's generosity alive in your congregation?
Hi, this is Rich Fritzen.
Hi, Rich.
So we make a practice of thanking people in the middle of every Sunday service. So people who participated in this, people who helped out gardening, people who marched in something, whatever it is, they get named. If it's too many, they get asked to stand. But there's always a period of thanking people in every service, except for money. We never thank anybody for anything having to do with giving money.
Okay, great. Well, that's a great practice. I love that. Any others? Anybody else acknowledge the gifts of the people in your congregation and the generous contributions they make. I lost the chat box. Barry, are you on the chat in case anything comes up?
Yes, I am. I'm on monitoring the
Okay.
chat.
I lost my, it's here somewhere, but I can't see it.
Yeah, I had trouble with that last week too. When I was sharing my screen, I could not find the chat, so I have it open.
Okay, that's good. Don, you were unmuted. Did you want to share?
Yeah, we're somewhat the same. We recognize people for everything but money. We have started for our endowment contributions a legacy builders. Anyone who gave over say $1,000 to our endowment, they're recognized on a plaque that we change out every year. But in terms of like the major pledge donors, no, we don't do that, and I think that's pretty common.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad to hear that you are recognizing your legacy givers. I think that's a great start. That's a wonderful way of acknowledging that money has a place. David says they have an annual auction, and each person who provided something receives a thank you letter indicating who bought the item or service and how much was raised. Oh, I love that. That's great. That's great. So it's not just giving them the tax document, it's also giving them some recognition and acknowledgement of their generosity. That's great. All right. Good. So moving on with just a couple more definitions. So donor. So that's a term that's used very much in sort of the nonprofit donor, the nonprofit world. It's not a term that we are as familiar with at the congregational level. Somehow we think of donors as being outside of our process. So, but a donor is somebody who donates money, somebody who donates something. It could be donating for the auction, as David lifted up. It could be donating money for an annual campaign. It could be donating time, volunteering in the congregation. But typically we think of donors as being those who are giving us the financial resources we need in our congregations.
Pat, the folks from Arlington entered an item in the chat that said
Cool.
we provide an annual list of the names of pledgers.
Great.
So I think that's a very positive thing, to provide some recognition of people for their financial contributions.
Yeah, that's great. And, you know, I think we've been reluctant to do that in congregations because we thought that we might be shaming people who weren't able to be on that list. But, you know, I think, again, you have to find balance in the congregation. And it certainly has been a practice. For example, something like the service committee, the UU service committee, has long printed names of donors. And, you know, certainly the UUA always lifts up the generosity of congregations who contribute their fair share. So I think there's a lot of there are a lot of examples out there of where we do in fact share the good news of the people who are donating. So in terms of the 21st century, things are just a little bit different. I'm a baby boomer, so you know, a lot of my life experience and certainly most of my formative experiences around money and ways of donating were formed in the latter half of the 20th century. But things are definitely changing, and I know that Barry's going to spend some time on that next week. But a couple of quick points. One is that financial generosity is countercultural. If you dig into the statistics, a majority of Americans do not give to nonprofit or certainly to religious institutions. It is not something that everybody does. So sometimes we have to teach people how to do that, how to interpret and learn about generosity as a practice, and how to make that giving something that's connected to our values, particularly our Unitarian Universalist values. Generosity is often based on some kind of an exchange. So sometimes when we think about generosity, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to give you a gift for your birthday. And then when my birthday rolls around, you know, we live in this world where there's kind of that expectation that you're going to give me something. It might not have to be the same exact value, but there's just sort of this idea that there's an exchange happening, that our relationships and our society at large is very transactional. We live in a society that, of course, is based on capitalism, as much of the world is, and we have been in an age of strong consumerism. And what can happen in a congregation is that sometimes we have a mission, we have purpose, but then somebody says, you know, listen, I really wish the congregation could hire a membership coordinator. So, you know, I'm going to donate $5,000, and I'm hoping that that's what you're going to use it for. Or even something on a smaller scale. You know, I would love to donate $1,000, but I really wish there was a bench out there in the memorial garden. And it would be great if, you know, you could put my name on a little plaque. So sometimes people who do have financial resources, sometimes they can use that in a way that influences the decisions of leaders. You know, if you have, and, you know, tell me if you've experienced this, but if you have a congregation where you have one or two very large pledges each year, you may feel really dependent on those, and therefore that person just gets a little bit more of the ear of either the minister or the board president or others in positions to make important decisions in the congregation. There are also giving trends that are sort of based on demographics. So different generations give in different ways. And I'm going to send you all this PowerPoint. You can read all of the little interesting details. This is information from Blackbaud, a financial organization. So, you know, boomers have one way of giving. The folks who are a little bit older than us are going to give a little bit differently, and they also give at a higher percentage rate. Generation Y, which is also known as millennials, or no, it's kind of the in-between, actually. It's not millennials. Millennials are not actually on this list. They give at the lowest level. So there are reasons for that. There are some demographic assumptions that we've made based on the work of a number of sociologists. So just knowing this is information that's really good for folks who are involved in your stewardship team, for example. If they're going to be going out and doing that, having that conversation that Barry talked about, that one-on-one conversation, it's really helpful to know, well, if this person, I think this person is a Gen X, and, you know, this is the kind of attitude they might have, the kind of worldview they might bring into the conversation, and that might influence how much they are, or how much they might be expected to give, or how much they think they're expected to give versus how much they can give. It's interesting, one of the studies that I actually read talked about millennials and how millennials, there's, you know, sort of demographic turnings that happen, and millennials are a lot more like their grandparents than they are like their parents. And they actually are much more willing to give, and people don't always make asks of them that are sort of commensurate with their willingness to give, because they kind of think, well, they're young, they probably don't have any money. But in fact, millennials are actually more inclined to give to something that they are feeling a connection with the mission and purpose. So just knowing about these things can be helpful. So in addition to donors, and those are the people who give, you know, we also have stakeholders in our congregation. So stakeholders are people who may not be our donors, but they're part of the money conversation as well. So that could be, this particular definition kind of comes out of the general nonprofit world, but there's staff, our staff, we don't know, all of our staff is not Unitarian Universalist, but they've got a stake in how we collect money, how we spend money, and how we value the money that we do have. The people in our community have a stake in our financial health. Different organizations that we may be making donations to. For example, if you're doing a Share the Plate, those people are going to be, benefactors of your generosity in a Share the Plate campaign. And so they're stakeholders in our whole financial story. So there's also this weird thing with congregations. So we're giving money to ourselves. So the work that we do in congregations is to, for our own spiritual development, our own connection and community. And so if we give money to ACLU, unless we are a lawyer employed by ACLU, we're giving it to another organization to do work in our stead that supports our values and the things that we believe in. And same thing if we're giving to another organization, something like Planned Parenthood. We're giving to something that is really we're in consonance with that organization, and they're living out the values for us. In a congregation, we're giving it to provide services to ourselves, and that for some people that's an odd tension. Particularly if folks are not churched, or if they're not coming out of a background where they kind of understand how the process and the governance of a congregation operates. There's something a little weird about that for some people. So again, I want to do another quick reflection. How comfortable is your congregation with talking about money? And specifically, are your leaders comfortable talking about money? So if a couple, 3 or 4 folks want to either write in the chat or maybe unmute yourself. Easy, hard, I don't know, because we never talk about it. Anybody want to share?
Well, it's Rich Fritzen again.
Oh, good. Hi, Rich.
We were pretty typical, fairly reticent about it until we did a capital campaign which involved home visits, lots of them, and we trained people to talk about money with people in their homes. And now it was very successful, and it's all over except for the implementation and spending, which turned out to be worse than actually raising it. But besides that, we have a cohort of church leaders who are very able to go and speak directly to people about money. It was a terrific side benefit of running the campaign.
That's great. And you did that with an outside consultant. Is that right, Rich?
Yes, we did.
Yeah. So Rich is from a little bit larger congregation. So they had the resources to bring an outside consultant in to help them with their capital campaign, and they did that training with these folks. That's great. Anybody else? You can share a good positive story. Or anybody have a particular challenge they want to share around this idea of talking about money publicly? Looks like we have a chat comment. So Fairfax says some are comfortable and some aren't, and it's a mix. And that can, that can actually create tension within a stewardship team. And, we'll talk a little bit about the wisdom path and one of the ways that you might use the wisdom path in a few minutes. But getting the folks on your stewardship team comfortable with their own relationship with money is really important. Can really be an important and positive step towards success for your campaign.
And I would add, getting all of your leaders comfortable talking about money really changes the climate in the congregation. If your board talks about money beyond just a quick cursory look at financial statements that most board members don't understand that well, but to actually talking about money as a spiritual asset and giving as a spiritual practice. And if your minister and music director and religious educator can all talk about money, it really does change the culture, and it opens people up to be talking about money in more positive and creative ways, not just in their congregations, but in their personal lives.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Barry. Okay. All right, so we're going to move on. The night is upon us here. Charles says at a recent board retreat, we asked board members to talk about why they give. That's a great practice. Yep. All right, so, things have changed, right? Things have really changed in our congregations. What's changed? Well, many congregations of all mainline denomination, of all stripes, so to speak, are experiencing lower attendance. There are just fewer people in American society who are attending church. With fewer people coming in, and we're many of us are experiencing that little post-election bump, but I'm talking kind of about longer-term trends. There's just lower attendance and lower affiliation. So folks maybe they'll visit, but then they're also going to go to the Methodist church, or they're going to go to the Buddhist Sangha, or they're not necessarily ready to join or as motivated to join. So there's lower attendance and less affiliation, which results in fewer members. The demographics are changing. So there are some demographics, of course, large demographics that are working against many congregations. One of those is for rural congregations is shifts in population. Those demographic things can impact us. Actually, the millennial cohort was very large, but the new cohort, the families that are having children now, is much smaller. So many of our RE programs have actually shrunk because that particular demographic is shifting. Again, demographics around who's attending church, things like the racial makeup of our country, which is changing, and fewer people are attending certain kinds of congregations, Protestant, mainline, Unitarian Universalist, those kinds of things. So lots of demographic shifts. Fewer members. Well, when there are fewer members, we have fewer volunteers. So there's less time that's being given and devoted to do the work of the congregation. The work of the congregation, in many cases, hasn't changed that much. We really haven't figured out that we cannot do things the way that we have always done them, and that it's still okay to have 20 committees, even though our membership has shifted dramatically. So you have fewer members, you have less time. Well, you pay people, you have more staff. But the more staff you have, the higher costs you have. So budgets have increased. Certainly they've increased over the last 20 to 25, 30 years. With higher costs, we've had a huge increase in the cost of benefits. And we also have had a lot of conversation in many of our congregations and a push from our professional organizations and our Unitarian Universalist Association to be fair compensators. And ultimately, that is the intention that we all have. We want to pay our people justly and fairly because that's a value that we hold. But we're finding that as we have more staff and the costs are higher, that that is a challenge for us. The rest of the world, meanwhile, is stagnant in terms of wages. We've had basically stagnant wages since the Reagan years. So people's salaries aren't going up in a way that would supporting that increased budget that we're all facing. So as a result, we often get lower pledges. Again, demographics, our churches also skew older. So many of the folks in our congregations are baby boomer and older, not all, but percentage-wise, we have a larger percentage of older members. And many of those folks, as they age, their income becomes more fixed, and they're less able to give more as costs go up. So lower pledges, higher costs, fewer members, it's the perfect storm for congregations. Many things are pressing in, but when congregations say, gosh, I don't know how this happened. Well, this is how it happened. It's the perfect storm. So there's a lot of pressure on us in congregations to raise money, to balance the budget. Unfortunately, what we know about our donors and what we know about people who are often coming to congregations today is that they are looking for something else. They're looking for something deeper. They're looking for a vision and a mission that they share, and they're looking for a mission that they can participate in. They are not necessarily tuned in to this idea that it's all about balancing the budget, which sometimes is the way that we come into the conversation when we're involved kind of down in the weeds with the budget, and we see the need so starkly. So religious fundraising, and this is information that comes out of the Lilly School of Philanthropy at Purdue in Indiana. There's really three ways that people are moved to give. One is they give because they feel they have to. Either they're in a situation where there's a tithe, or there's a set fee, or there's peer pressure, some kind of reason that they give, not out of their heart, but because there's something else pressing in on them. And then there's relational giving. I give because I love the people, I'm a part of this community, and I feel connected. I have a real connection with these people, this place, and maybe this theology. And then there's that transformative giving, and those are the people who, for them, something in their life, their life has been changed, or as we often say in Unitarian Universalism, their life has been saved by this faith. And so they have been so transformed by their relationship with this congregation that they are deeply, deeply invested in it. That doesn't always translate into dollars, but it certainly translates into motivation and a reason to give. So balance that with, we have typologies. So there are two typical ways that our congregations operate. One is this: we have to pay the bills. We're really looking at it as a scarcity situation. And that's not, I'm not saying that is bad, because that's often true. It's often a reality for congregation, is that we do have bills. And so by necessity, that focus becomes more internal. And we really need people to step up. If we're going to survive, we really need people to step up. But then, so the opposite end of that, or a balancing kind of typology, is we may not be rich, but we have all that we need to do the ministry that we want to do in this world. Sometimes that means that hard decisions have to be made. Have we seen congregations make hard decisions? Sure. I was on a phone today with a congregation that's making some really difficult decisions around letting some staff go, beloved staff that have to go. But they also know that having staff is not their mission. That's not their mission. Their mission is to bring the Unitarian Universalist values into the world, and to support the love and justice and compassion of this faith, and so they've made some difficult choices, and sometimes having a more external focus in what we're doing can really help, kind of sharpen the saw, as somebody once said, right, Franklin Covey, and can really help us see how we might want to use the resources that we do have differently. So, the paradigm is shifting. At one time, we could count on people to give just because they felt they had to. Certainly that was the case back in the middle of the 20th century, which is when many of our congregations were actually born. We had a real explosion, and certainly the fellowship movement was born in the 50s and 60s. And so that's the paradigm, that's the money DNA of many of our congregations, that the focus was on the institution, and everybody had, the budget really was how we determined how much money we needed and what kind of contribution people needed to give. And now things are different. We're thinking more about values, and we want our money to have impact. So we want money that really creates change. And this will be we're not going to go there. We're going to move on to some other strategies and tools. So some of the ways that people are shifting strategy is, rather than just focus on money and talk about money once a year, which we have done for decades, generations of church life, we've really focused on that once a year canvas. And instead, we are incorporating money talk into the whole wheel of the year in our congregations. And we'll talk in a minute about how to do that. We're trying to shift that conversation from, and that kind of that paradigm from one of scarcity to abundance. We may not have a lot of money, but we have a lot of really committed members. We may not have a lot of big building, but we have a community that has really been supportive and been there for one another, and provides great pastoral care to one another. So there are different ways that we can frame the what we don't have versus the what we do have. And if we can get ourselves in that conversation, that can help shift us out of that scarcity, because scarcity is really based on fear. And we want our people to not, it's hard for us to be mission focused and to really be doing the kind of work that we can do in our congregation when we're kind of stuck in that scarcity place of fear. We want to shift away from numbers and move towards stories. So not only do we want to hear people's stories, why do you give? Particularly if somebody maybe has made a legacy gift, that's somebody where there's been a really probably been a transformational impact on their life. And those are stories we really want to capture. And as generations get older and older, and as the technology gets better, get your video camera or get a phone and start to do some oral history with some of your older members, particularly your larger donors, about what has moved them to be so generous over their long connection with the congregation. Away from monies, budgets are not going to change anybody's heart, but stories will change people's hearts. Moving away from sort of a line item budget and moving towards, this is the mission we have. This is the purpose that we want this congregation to live out. And the more resources we have, the more we can really make that purpose come alive for us. And finally, moving away from maintenance and moving towards that mission word. We all, one of the things I know when we have newer congregations, I don't know if we have any newer congregations on this call, but sometimes we have conversations where they talk about, we want to buy a building, or when should we buy a building? And the new thinking, the new sort of way of the convention is, don't buy a building. Just use that money to make your mission come alive. Rent. Start small. The minute you buy a building, you limit your growth. And so we try to tell people, you don't want to be in that place where you're maintaining, where a lot of your budget is going towards maintaining an institution, as opposed to really living our UU values. So stewardship as a year-round practice, a lot of times the focus can be on the annual program, right? So the annual giving campaign. We recruit some people for stewardship, and we have this little process that takes place over 2 or 3 months. That's the ask. And then, when it's over, we see what we have, and then we present a budget and we vote on it at the annual meeting. And that's really, for some people, that's the main focus, and that's okay. But it shouldn't be the only work that we do throughout the year regarding stewardship. We need to be talking with people. We need to be telling our story. We need to be telling the story of our people and the impact that we've had on the world and on our community and on one another. And ways that we do that are through, we really recommend that stewardship that there be a stewardship sermon at least 4 times a year. Now, that doesn't mean that stewardship sermon is about money, but it can be. But 4 times a year, I mean, the more people hear it, and they hear it from the front of the church, whether you're a minister-led congregation or a lay-led congregation. It's great if you have a minister. The minister needs to be talking about stewardship. They need to be invested in it as well. We need to tell the story, and then we need to do the ask. We need to evaluate how did we do, what could we have done better, what could we have done differently, and maybe that's a kind of fallow time of the year to maybe really put some energy into the legacy giving. So maybe if you don't have an endowment program, that's a good time to have those conversations. And then you also want to be doing education with your people. You want to be educating, you want to do some training for your stewardship team. You want to be doing things like the wisdom path. You want to be doing multi-generational activities. And of course, you want to celebrate. You want to celebrate the success of your campaign, whether it's an annual campaign or a capital campaign. So these activities don't all have to happen within an 8-week period. They should be happening all year round, so that it just becomes, this is kind of part of the wheel of our year, that we talk about stewardship. We talk about how we generate resources and how we thank people for those resources. So Deb asked a question, some deeper ideas about how to be doing stewardship sermons that aren't money focused. There's actually a stewardship sermon award that goes out every year, and you can actually go onto uua.org, and I'll provide you with that link, and read past stewardship sermons. But it can be things about Earth Day, caring for our planet. It can be, stewardship can be how we care for one another. So how do we live in right relationship in our congregation? I don't know, Barry, can you think of any other little quick examples of stewardship sermon not focused on cold hard cash?
Yeah, I think, so when I talk about stewardship in congregations, I use a definition that I picked up, oddly enough, from Wikipedia, that great fount of ancient wisdom. And it says that stewardship is taking care of something that we do not own. And I really like that. I think you can spend a lot of time thinking about those few words. What does it mean to, number one, feel some responsibility for something? What does it mean not to own something? What does it mean not to own our congregation? To me, it means that our congregations live beyond us, live beyond our current membership. certainly beyond us as individuals. So there's a way to talk about stewardship that stretches back in time and forward into the future. And then what does it really mean to take care of something? And there's a lot of dimensions to taking care of something that are not money related.
Yeah.
So I think you can, I could imagine, I'm not a minister, so I don't preach about these things that much, but I could imagine creating a 4-sermon series that you did over the course of a year that would talk about money maybe in 2 of them,
Right.
and maybe not mention money at all in the other 2.
Yeah, great. I love that. Thank you. So, okay, sorry, I'm just moving along. So, trying to keep it moving here. It's 8 o'clock, and we want to have a little time at the end for some questions. But all effective stewardship strategies have to have some kind of an educational dimension. And that educational dimension really is, how do we educate the congregation about the importance of stewardship, about what stewardship can mean for individuals, what stewardship means in the broader sense, what stewardship can mean in a family or in our multi-generational community. So focusing on how we educate the children is a really important part of having an effective stewardship program. And a question that I will ask congregations, and sometimes it's kind of a question, because they're not really sure. Who is your stewardship educator? Whose job is that in the congregation to educate people about what it means to be good stewards of our congregation? And for some congregations, they might say, well, hey, it's the stewardship committee. Well, but the stewardship committee only meets in, January, February, and March, and then they take 9 months off and they recruit somebody new. So who is that ongoing voice that carries the message of the value of stewardship throughout the year? It could be that it's part of the board's work. It could be that it's the minister. There's no right answer, but it's a question you need to ask yourself in your congregation. Who's doing this work? Who are we asking to do this work, or who is just doing it intuitively or implicitly? Again, part of the strategy is getting people to tell their money stories. And I love that Candy's comment about Nashville. Board members are talking about why they give. And we can even take it a little bit deeper. So not only why do you give, but what does money mean to you? What was your money story when you were a child? How was money talked about? Was money talked about in your home? Wasn't it? Did you, there's a great exercise in the Wisdom Path where we ask people to kind of pick a proverb that is kind of representative of the way that they grew up understanding money. So some of us grew up in households, a penny saved is a penny earned, or hey, there's no free lunch, or there are lots of different little axioms and idioms out there about money, and there's a real fun exercise about that. But you want your healthiest leaders to be on the stewardship team, or your Canvas team, or whatever your annual pledge, whatever you're calling it. And you want also to know that they understand what the mission is, and that they are people who can articulate the mission, and who understand how the resources are connected to the mission. We want to make stewardship part of our multi-generational ministry. Generosity is something that, if you survey Family Feud, if you survey 100 families and ask them, what are some of the important values that you want to pass on to your children, generosity is one that families often will lift up. So how are we fulfilling that promise to our families and to our children? How are we teaching them? What are we teaching them about money in the congregation? And how can our religious educator be a partner to us in that work? Sometimes in our congregations, the stewardship process kind of completely bypasses the religious educator. So it might involve the minister, but the religious educator might not be drawn into that conversation and be a part of that process. Not that you want your religious educator out, doing one-on-one conversations with people, but how can they be a resource? How can you partner together? How can we get families talking about generosity and about stewardship in the home and in the congregation? So, as our last reflection for the night, I'm curious, how is stewardship connected to what you're doing with children? How are you involving families in stewardship? Is there anybody who's got an example of that hasn't shared yet? Although, Rich, if you've got an example, go ahead. You've been my go-to guy tonight. How are you involving families in stewardship? And again, think about that stewardship more broadly.
Well, Pat, while people are thinking, I'll say something. I'll jump in.
Great.
When I teach people to do annual budget drives, no matter how they do it, whether they do it with one-on-one stewardship campaigns or whether they do it with small groups or large groups, I encourage that the conversation involve the entire family. So when I sit down with people in my home or their home to talk about their thinking about their pledging for the congregation, I suggest they include their kids and that they talk about how their financial commitment to the congregation reflects their values and why do they decide to give. Giving is voluntary. Why do they give some of their money away? And I encourage that to be a part of the conversation. And I find the times that I've been able to participate in that, it's been incredibly rich. So I would encourage you to think about doing that.
That is so inspiring. I love that. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. Anybody else involving all ages in your stewardship strategy? I know that some congregations will do like a little separate sort of little children's auction. So it's an auction, a big event venue. Some people will do something that's, sort of little games and little toys and stuff for kids. Did somebody unmute to share?
Yeah, this is Arlington.
Hi.
Hi. We do a couple of things, and we just started doing it actually a couple of years ago. Our RE program is on a separate floor, and as a result, a lot of parents kind of are separated. So during the campaign, we always have a table, at least one of the Sundays, maybe two, downstairs where all the RE families are interacting. We have educational programs with the younger kids, which this year resulted in a project that they came up with called Be the Change, where they came and collected pocket change during the fellowship hour and actually raised about $2,000 that way. We went and met with the high school kids, the high school group, and talked to them about the budget for the church and pledging, and told them all this stuff was online and that this was information that was available to them. And yeah, they have their own fundraisers as well. So we've with the help of a recent addition to our staff of the RE director, this is her second full year. I mean, she's really helped us to develop, that relationship.
And we had Rachel.
And we had Rachel. We had a fifth grader do, I would argue, the most popular testimonial of the campaign, and it was very wonderful.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's great. Thank you. Yeah, was there somebody else that wanted to?
Hi, this is Rich again. I have a question. We have the children in the service every Sunday for the first 15 or 20 minutes. There's a hymn, there's a story for all ages, there might be an introduction, and then they leave. And they never in the room when the basket is passed, which I think is just a terrible, it's just a mistake. I would love to see them, have them watch the money appear as people reach into their pockets and take it out and put it in a basket. Does anybody have an order of service where children get to see that on a regular basis?
I can tell you two things that I know of. One is that, and obviously you'd have to coordinate this with your minister or worship leaders, but in many of the congregations that I deal with, they do exactly what you described, Rich. They have the children in at the beginning, but then once every so often, whether it's once every 6 weeks, once a quarter, once a month, they have a multi-generational service. They have the entire service. It's a family-oriented service, but it's well done, so adults like it as well. And then the children are there for the passing of the plate, of course. But then I have seen occasionally where the congregations will reorder things to have the basket passed while the kids are there. The other thing is, again, when I visit congregations, and usually I try to speak in the worship service about whatever I'm there to talk about, I suggest that we do it while the kids are still there. And I'll tailor my remarks so that it's appropriate for both children and adults. So I think it's worth thinking about and figuring out, with your worship folks, how to do exactly that.
Thank you.
And David has shared that he was a member of a congregation that children had their own monthly collection, and they decided, which is a great fourth principle project, how the money will be spent. What are we going to do with this? And I know a number of congregations that have done that. I think there are other ways as well. Some congregations participate in the Guest at Your Table program, which is interesting. For, a couple decades, Guest at Your Table had these little boxes, and the families would take a box, they would take it home kind of over the traditional holiday, Thanksgiving through Christmas season, and then they would fill them up and bring them back. And they stopped doing that. They stopped providing the boxes for a couple years, and the hue and cry was huge. Families said, we love that. We love just putting this box in the middle of our table. We talk about it, and kids put money in on a regular, ongoing basis. So something like that. Many congregations are still participating in. We used to do the UNICEF boxes. I know some congregations will have like a little parade around Halloween time, and the kids will have the little orange boxes. Maybe that's a Northeastern thing, I'm not sure, but there are a number of congregations I know that do that. So definitely different ways to involve children in that. But also, I love the idea of having a fifth grader doing some kind of testimony, and I've seen that also with youth. I think that's a tremendous way of involving the different ages. So good. Okay, folks, we're getting down there. So the last strategy that I just wanted to lift up for you was by all means, call your neighbor, phone a friend. If you are aware, if you're in the Philadelphia area and you just heard Rich talk about, gosh, what a great capital campaign they had, write down his number right now. Find those people who are near you, and what's near. If it's somebody that you want to be able to have, your stewardship committee, maybe have a meeting some Sunday afternoon with their stewardship committee to find out what kind of success they had in the previous year. That's a great idea. Other congregations can be tremendous resources for you. And so never discount that you can learn something. And by the way, if you are a small congregation, you can learn from congregations of other sizes. And if you are a mid-size or larger congregation, you can learn from small congregations as well. So, size can be a great way of sharing things we have in common, but there are other practices that really do cross that size barrier. So I want to sort of finish up my presentation here with a few resources for you. Mostly I wanted to just lift up the Wisdom Path. It is a wonderful program. It's 12 sessions. And does that seem like a lifetime? 12 hour-and-a-half workshops? Well, we're going to tell you how to maybe not do all 12. But what it wants to do, it wants help people to kind of explore their own relationship with money, both at a personal level. So they're going to have a practice where they're going to have an exercise where they They do they construct their own sort of money biography. We are going to also talk about values. We're going to talk about how ask that question of how does money connect to our spiritual life? What is the connective tissue there? We're going to talk about things like some economic injustice, economic challenges. We're going to talk a little bit about the multi-generational. So it has some very specific aims. It does have 12 workshops, and it would be great if everybody would do all 12. But we know you can't do that. So there are different ways of doing it. You can do just a single workshop in one day where you invite all kinds of people, people from different committees. You can pick and choose, cherry pick some exercises just to do with the board. If the board is having a retreat, for example, you could have a small group ministry where they work through some of the questions, some of the reflection questions. There's reflection questions in every session, so you can pull some of those out for a small group ministry. You can just do it if you are a congregation where you do some adult programming in the evening, for example. You could do 3 sessions in the fall, 3 sessions in the spring, and so you can spread it out. One of the things that you want to really be careful about is who you choose to be leaders. And you want people who are comfortable with money, who are willing to talk with people confidentially. It is something where we're going to talk about our feelings about money, and so it is a good program to sort of have a little bit of understanding of and a covenant around confidentiality. So the leaders need to be people who can respect that as well. I am a co-author of the first edition. There have been some revisions that have been made. I would be more than happy to spend time with a congregation, have a phone call or something to help you understand how you can tailor that program to have that money conversation in your congregation. Some other resources Barry mentioned, beyond fundraising, 2 3-hour sessions. That'd be great too. Yeah, it's flexible. We can work with that. There's a great book by Mark Ewart. He is also part of the Stewardship for Us group that Barry is a part of. He wrote a book called Generosity Path, and it's a wonderful book. It's telling people stories. It's telling stories about why they are, how they came into their own practice of generosity. And it's folks of all ages, so I recommend that as a resource. I also love the Stewardship for Us blog, and you can go back and read older posts, and oftentimes you can find just the right blog that can answer a question you might have as you're going through the wheel of the year in stewardship. There are multi-generational resources rather. Back in the winter of 2015, there was a wonderful, I don't know if y'all, in the UU world, sometimes there's a center insert that is a family pages, they call it, and there was one on money back in the winter of 2015, and so it had some activities, it had a story, it had some additional places to look for more. So I recommend that as a resource. There was also a webinar that was led by the Faith Development Office back in November of 2015. Oh gosh, look, Pat Infanti was on that webinar. Yes, and it was all about sort of having the money talk with children and families, and so that might be a resource that you want to look for. There's a PowerPoint. There's also a video available on that. So that's it for just a couple of quick resources, and just want to offer some final time for questions and answers on anything that we've talked about today. I'll take a minute.
Pat, while people are thinking, I'll mention one thing that occurred to me. My wife and I are members of the Church of the Larger Fellowship.
Yes.
because we move around so much. So, but that's neither here nor there. But the Church of the Larger Fellowship has a monthly publication called Quest. And this month's publication, I believe it's the May publication, is all about money.
Yay.
Money, money, money is what it's called. And you can find it online. I'm looking at it right now, and I read it, and it's got some very provocative and profound and inspiring, as the entire thing is all about money.
That's great.
You can find it at clf.uua.org. And if you click on Quest, I believe is the link. I'll send the link out, or I'll put it in my presentation next week. But it's the Church of the Larger Fellowship, and it's the May issue of Quest.
That's great. Yeah, and there was also a General Assembly multi-generational workshop. It was in Portland. Was that 2015 or 2016? I think that was 2015. And I don't think it was videotaped, but there is a PowerPoint available from that on the uua.org as well. Somebody asked about the reading. Let me, I think we can stop sharing here. I will stop sharing. Someone asked about the reading that I started out with, the Tom Owen Toll reading, and that is from a book that is called Wake Up. It's a wonderful book. So Wake Up by Tom Owen Toll. You can get that at the In Spirit bookstore, formerly known as the UUA bookstore.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Tom Owen Toll. Anything else? Any other?
I'll mention one other thing about multi-generational work that I like a lot, and that congregations sometimes don't think of, but you should think of it. If you're doing any kind of visioning work or strategic planning work, it's not that hard, if you think about it a little bit, to ask to involve the children. Even the very youngest children. Stewardship for Us folks do a process called Searching for the Future, which is a wonderful thing. It's written up in Beyond Fundraising, and also on our website. But there's a component of it that's for children. There's a component for youth, and it's remarkably easy to get kids involved, and then they get really excited and they talk to their parents. And it's not directly about money. It's more about stewardship and visioning the congregation and its future. But again, I think if you stop and think a little bit, just about everything that you do can have a multi-generational component if you think about it that way and if you're motivated to do it.
Yay. That's great. That's great. Somebody asked about the slides, and I will send them out after the meeting, and we have been recording, so we will also I will turn that into a YouTube video and make that available if folks are interested in that.
And I see that the Arlington folks answered the question. Somebody else asked, how did they go about publishing their list of pledgers? Mm-hmm. And so it says right here, we published it in our order of service at about the halfway point of our campaign to demonstrate the depth of giving and to encourage the holdouts.
Yay, yeah. Yeah.
And I was at a congregation this past weekend, and they have a big display in their sanctuary of kind of cutouts of people figures that they paste up on the walls in the sanctuary. And then as people make their pledge for the year, they write their name and a little something else on their people images. And so as you're sitting in the sanctuary looking at that, participating in the worship service, you get this great visual and all the figures are holding hands. Yes. So it's a really very nice visual of people holding hands and contributing in whatever way financially that they can to the annual operations of the church.
Yeah. And I mean, if you feel there's some discomfort and you haven't really done enough education yet in your congregation to be able to, print the names of everybody who's given, there are other different ways. You can, once somebody gives, you can put a sticker on their name tag. Some congregations have special little stickers made up. So if you have increased your pledge by 5% or by 10%, you get, some little special sticker. So it's not, in your face kind of public, but it's definitely out there. And when somebody's having a conversation with somebody else at coffee hour and their eyes drift down to their name tag and they're like, oh, wow, she's increased her pledge by 5%. Maybe I should do that. So it's a little mini piece of modeling and educating people.
There was some talk before also, I forget at what point, Pat, that this came up, but there was some talk about, when we talk about that we recognize people for their gifts of time in our congregations. And almost all of you said we do very little about recognizing our gifts of money. And I know part of that is that we do feel like people have very different capacities, and we don't want to embarrass people who have minimal capacity, although we're okay embarrassing them about not committing their time, I suppose. But that's another matter. But one thing to keep in mind is if you use some sort of progressive guideline for encouraging people to give, like the UUA's guideline or something similar to it, then even people of very modest means can be leadership givers if they give 1 or 2% of their income, because that's what the lowest level of giving calls for. Those people can be making more of a sacrifice than someone who might give $20,000 who makes hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. So if you recognize people based on some sort of a progressive guide that reflects varying capacities, then you don't get into shaming people, and you don't get into overly emphasizing that we value the wealthy over everybody else.
Exactly. Yeah, and I know a congregation, they did a campaign, and they had some cute name for it, which of course escapes me, but something with a 5 in it. And basically they were asking everybody to increase their pledge by $5. So if I have a $100 pledge, I could increase my pledge by $5 over the course of the year, and I get a 5% sticker. If I'm a $10,000 a year donor and I can do 5%, I get a 5% sticker. So nobody's, we're both being identified for increasing our investment, increasing our capacity, but it's not evident to people that we're in very different places financially. All right. Candy's asking, what kind of reaction is there for listing people in the order of service? So anybody who has done that, listed names in the order of service of people who have given?
We do it pretty regularly each year at Mainline. No one complains to us about that particular thing.
Yeah.
Every time somebody suggests we should list the people who haven't complained, haven't pledged, and they can pledge just to get their name off, but that's always rejected.
Yeah. That would get a reaction.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Yeah, but I do find that sort of the positive recognition it is a motivator in and of itself as well. You may say, well, boy, I see lots of names of people that I may perceive as being in a similar demographic or in a similar life circumstance, and they have been able to give. And I guess that really may cause me to do a little bit of reflection and think about what I can do. Yeah.
I think we worry quite a bit in our congregations about offending people when we talk about money, and when we recognize people for their financial contributions. Sometimes, and I fully support the idea that we need to be sensitive about that. But at the same time, if you look around the world, you will see that recognition is clearly a huge motivator. Otherwise, every time you went to the theater, you wouldn't see long lists of people who give at different levels. And every time you went to the symphony or to any sort of nonprofit organization, you wouldn't see these lists. People look for their names on the list, and they look at everybody else's name on the list. And so these things clearly work, and they might offend 1 or 2 people. There's no question about it. But I think the value for the people that are motivated, that value far outweighs the small number of people that might be offended, assuming you do it in a careful and respectful way.
So I've got 8:28, so we are just about at the end of our time. Barry, do you want to do a 30-second just refresher on what session, a little preview of session 3?
Sure. So session 3 is going to be what I'm calling 21st century stewardship. So it's about, and it gets a little bit to the question that was asked earlier, why are we doing things exactly the way we did them 150 years ago? So I'm going to try to make the point that we're not doing them exactly the same way. I think there are some things, you know, it's kind of a baby and bathwater situation. You want to make some change. I'm a big fan of change. You want to be incorporating new technology and new techniques and new best practices and new ways of talking to one another and new ways of reaching different groups while marrying that to the ways that have always worked.
Yeah.
So that's the plan for next week. And just like for this week, if you now have, you know that we're going to start, we'll do the burning questions session again. So we didn't tell you we were going to do that last week. But we're telling you we're doing it next week, so you have a week now to think about any burning questions you might have. And I'll also take a look at the chat log and see if there are any questions that either could be talked about some more next week or questions that we didn't get to at all. I see there's a question that just got on there now, and I'll be able to talk about that next week as well.
Yay, yeah. Well, David, we'll get your question next week for sure. And I do have some closing words. And it's just perfect for this moment. Who knew? I planned ahead. It's from our hymnal, and it is the words of John Brigham. Go your ways, knowing not the answers to all things, yet seeking always the answer to one more thing than you know. So thank you all so much for being here and for your sharing tonight. And we're getting
Thank you, Pat.
Yay. Good. We will see you next week.
Same time, same station. Thank you all for joining us. And we really appreciate all your questions.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.